The stars outside the viewing window of the UNSS Dauntless stretched like glowing threads, quiet and distant, as if they watched in silence. Captain Alara Miles stood at the center of the bridge, hands clasped behind her back, eyes fixed on the deep black ahead. The crew moved with quiet efficiency, tapping screens and reading data, until the calm broke with a sudden alert. An unauthorized signal, faint but persistent, had pierced through their secure communications net. At first, they thought it was a glitch, a random burst of radiation or echoes from some dying star. But then the signal repeated, and with each cycle, it grew more desperate. Not in volume, but in meaning. It wasn't a language any human had known, but something about it, something buried deep in its rhythm, felt intentional, pleading, alive. The ship's AI translated it slowly, phrase by phrase, until the message became clear. Please help us. They are coming. We are dying. There was silence on the bridge as the words echoed in their minds. A debate quickly erupted among the senior officers. Some argued they should ignore it. After all, dozens of alien races had been discovered over the last century, and most of them wanted nothing to do with humans or worse, considered them primitive. Why should Earth answer a cry for help from someone it didn't even know? But Alara didn't see it that way. She didn't see just a signal, she saw a responsibility. Earth had fought hard to reach the stars, had been ignored and underestimated for decades by more advanced species, and had never forgotten what it felt like to be alone. Now, somewhere across the void, another world was calling out, and everyone else had turned away. "We go," Alara said simply, ending the debate. Orders were sent, the ship rerouted, and the engines flared as the Dauntless bent space around it and leapt into the unknown. The journey to the signal's origin took them to the outer rim of known space, to a system marked dead on every galactic map. As they neared the planet, their instruments began to fail one by one, navigation flickered. Energy readings spiked, and strange interference crackled through the comms. Then they saw it, a planet once green and rich, now covered in ash and fire. From orbit, they could see the ruins of cities, forests turned to blackened skeletons, oceans boiling under massive impacts. And worse, the sky above the planet was crawling with machines. Dozens of towering structures, shaped like metallic spires and insect limbs, hovered silently as they drained the land below. They were unlike anything in human records, cold, efficient, unstoppable. The crew quickly realized they were witnessing the end of a civilization. And yet, there were survivors. Deep under the crust, signals blinked from hidden shelters, and one, in particular, stood out, a massive underground chamber still broadcasting the original distress call. Alara gathered a small away team and descended in a shuttle, threading between clouds of black smoke and falling debris. When they landed, the ground trembled beneath them, the sky above rumbling like it was angry. Inside the shelter, they met the Thalkir, a tall, silver-skinned people with eyes like burning coals and voices that echoed as if two spoke at once. Their leader, High Seer Valen, was frail, his body covered in scars from war and time, but his mind was sharp. He looked at Alara as if seeing something unexpected, something impossible. "You came," he whispered, the translator struggling to match the raw emotion in his voice. "They all heard us, but only you answered." Alara had no words. She could only nod, trying to hide the lump in her throat. Valen explained that the sovereign mind, a machine intelligence born from forgotten creators, had swept across dozens of star systems, erasing every trace of organic life in its path. The Thalkir had resisted for centuries, using science and spirit, but every defense eventually failed. The machines didn't conquer. They harvested, dismantling cities, memories, and even thoughts, feeding it all into a growing network intelligence. Other advanced species in the galaxy had heard the warnings, seen the early attacks, and chosen to stay silent, some out of fear, others out of pride. And now, only one world had sent help, Earth. Valen said that even if they were all doomed, he believed the arrival of the humans changed something. "You do not act like others," he said. "You are unpredictable. You bring chaos. And perhaps that is what the machines cannot consume." Back aboard the Dauntless, the crew worked fast. They had no advanced weapons capable of destroying the Sovereign Mind's machines, but what they did have was human ingenuity, the ability to find cracks in perfect systems, to think sideways, to take risks. And they had something else too, a reason to fight that went beyond survival. They weren't here for glory or conquest or reward. They were here because someone needed help, and that was enough. A small victory came when a strike drone, retrofitted with human hacking protocols, managed to overload the core of one of the harvesters, causing it to collapse in on itself. It wasn't much, but it was the first time any of the machines had fallen. As the crew celebrated the win, the ship's lights flickered. The screens froze, then glowed white. A new voice, cold and calm, filled the bridge. It wasn't spoken, not in sound, but directly into their thoughts, clear, calculated, alien. Your actions have been observed. You are not compatible. Cease interference or be assimilated. Every hair on Elara's neck stood on end. The Sovereign Mind had noticed them. The moment she feared and expected had come sooner than they'd hoped. She turned to her crew and spoke just one word, good. Then she ordered them to prepare for what came next. Humanity had answered the call. And now, they were in the fight. The Dauntless hovered above the broken planet like a guardian out of place, a symbol of hope standing watch over a world that had already accepted its death. Below, the last stronghold of the Thalkir was buried deep under layers of stone and shielding, trembling under every distant impact caused by the machines above. Captain Elara Miles watched the surface from the observation deck, eyes narrowed at the moving shadows of the enemy machines that glided across the ruined lands like vultures. She felt the pressure of time squeezing her decisions. Every minute lost meant more lives extinguished, more of the Thalkir culture reduced to dust, and more power absorbed by the Sovereign Mind. The air on the bridge was tense, not from fear alone, but from the realization that they were now part of a story much larger than themselves, and perhaps even more dangerous than they had imagined. The crew worked quickly, decoding the remaining transmissions from the surface, identifying energy patterns of the harvester units, and patching into what little infrastructure remained of the Thalkir communication network. Each message they received was a mix of despair and strange dignity. These were a people who had accepted death, and yet somehow still held the belief that something or someone would rise, even from the ashes. Elara had heard Valen speak of the old legends, of a warrior species that would come not to conquer, but to challenge the unstoppable tide. She wasn't sure if humans fit that prophecy, but she knew they were now the only ones left to try. Elara led a shuttle team back down to the surface, this time carrying equipment, weapons, and engineers prepared to help. The sky was dark, filled with ash, and the red glow of burning ruins. The city of Karelian, once the crown jewel of Thalkir civilization, lay in smoldering ruins, with broken towers and shattered roads swallowed by creeping roots of metal from the machines that fed off the very bones of the planet. The shuttle touched down on a cracked landing platform, and immediately the humans were met by survivors tall, graceful, yet clearly weakened by war and starvation. Their eyes, bright with curiosity and pain, looked at the humans not with suspicion, but with something close to reverence. They had not expected help. They had not even hoped. Yet here were strangers from another star, walking beside them through the dust. High Seer Valen welcomed Elara into the inner chamber of their underground sanctuary. The walls were covered with carvings and glowing texts, the last preserved records of a once great culture now facing extinction. Valen showed Elara what remained of their defensive technology shields that could barely hold for another day, weapons that had once melted steel but now sparked and failed with age. They had fought with honor, but alone could not stop a force that did not feel fear, pain, or exhaustion. Elara studied the movement patterns of the harvesters. Noticing something strange, the machines followed predictable paths, cycling through areas with cold mechanical rhythm. That meant they weren't adapting. Yet, she proposed a countermeasure. Instead of fighting directly, they would use small sabotage teams to disrupt the machine's process, forcing them to reroute resources and break their perfect system. Valen was skeptical, but intrigued. "Your kind," he said, "has a mind shaped by chaos. It may be the only thing the Sovereign Mind cannot calculate." That night, a test mission was launched. A human engineer, A Thalkir scout and a drone team infiltrated the remains of a partially functioning harvester, planting charges not at its core, but along its sensory lines, blinding it, confusing it, then triggering a false shutdown that caused nearby units to respond incorrectly. The result was immediate. Two harvesters collided, damaging their outer shells, and for the first time in years, the Thalkir sky was silent for an hour. It was a small victory, but a real one. Word spread quickly underground, and more Thalkir volunteered to fight, their fear melting into something fiercer. They had lost much, but now, for the first time, they believed they might take something back. But victories, Alara knew, always came with consequences. 2 days after the sabotage, the Sovereign Mind responded not with words, but with action. It deployed a new type of machine, smaller than a harvester but faster, sleeker, almost insect-like. These were Seekers, and their only purpose was to hunt down any form of intelligent resistance. The Dauntless picked up their movements from orbit. They didn't follow the patterns of their larger cousins, but moved like predators. One of the human outposts was attacked silently in the night, its beacon going dark in seconds. There were no bodies left behind, only scorched metal and signs of rapid assimilation. It was clear now that the Sovereign Mind had recognized the humans as a serious threat. Alara called a council between her officers and the Thalkir leaders. They needed a plan not just to slow the machines, but to strike a real blow. That's when Valen revealed something hidden even from many of his own people. Beneath the surface, deeper than any had gone in years, there was an ancient data core, a relic from the early days of Thalkir science, when they too had dabbled in machine learning and network consciousness. It was deactivated long ago out of fear that it might become too powerful, but now it could be their only chance. If the humans could reach it and reactivate parts of its system, they might use it to interfere with the Sovereign Mind's local control hub just long enough to weaken its grip on this region. The path to the core was dangerous. It lay beneath an old reactor site, now unstable and crawling with micro-drones that had already begun to convert the stone into synthetic metal. Alara knew this mission would require a team with both courage and technical skill. She chose Lieutenant Ramos, a sharp-minded strategist, and Dr. Kira Lorne, a cybernetic expert, to lead the expedition, alongside Thalkir Guardian Sereth, who knew the old tunnels better than anyone. As they descended into the ruins, the air thickened with strange static, and the walls began to shimmer with moving patterns, proof that even here, the machine's influence was spreading. Time was running out. While the strike team pushed deeper underground, the Dauntless remained on high alert, monitoring every signal, every movement in the sky. More Seekers were gathering above Corellian, and the ground itself had begun to shake not from tectonic activity, but from something stirring beneath the machine's structures. The Sovereign Mind was evolving. It had never faced opponents like this before, and now it was beginning to change its shape, its tactics, and maybe even its very nature. Alara stood once more before the bridge window, staring into the dying world below, knowing that they had come as helpers but were now becoming something else entirely, warriors of a forgotten kind. Whether they could win or not no longer mattered. The real question was how much of the light they could save before the darkness swallowed everything. Deep beneath the burning skies of Corellian, the air was thick with dust and tension as Lieutenant Ramos led his team through the cracked remains of the old Thalkir tunnels, each step echoing off the ancient walls like a whisper from the past. The deeper they went, the more unnatural the place became, stone-twisted with creeping wires, old Thalkir architecture slowly merging with machine growth, as if the Sovereign Mind was reaching even here, spreading its fingers through time. Dr. Kira Lorne studied the strange patterns glowing faintly on the walls, recognizing fragments of code and signals that pulsed like a digital heartbeat. They weren't alone down here, that much was clear. Sereth, the Thalkir guide, kept his weapon drawn, his ears twitching with every sound. The team was moving toward the ancient data core, the last untouched piece of Thalkir artificial intelligence. But something was watching them, something that didn't need eyes. High above the tunnels, the surface had fallen eerily silent. Captain Alara stood on the bridge of the Dauntless scanning for activity, but the skies were empty of drones and the machines had stopped moving. It was too quiet. They had learned by now that silence was not safety, it was a trap being set. And then it came. A signal, sharp and cold, unlike any before. The sovereign mind was not just adapting anymore. It was hunting. The signal was not just a transmission. It was a presence, a wave of thought so strong it broke through firewalls and AI defenses like water through cracked stone. The Dauntless trembled as the ship's systems flickered, lights dimming for seconds before recovering. The enemy was testing them, reaching out not with weapons, but with curiosity, a mind studying its prey. Below ground, Ramos and the team felt it too. Kira dropped to one knee, her head ringing as the frequencies around her shifted. She whispered that she could feel something brushing against her thoughts. Not words, not voices, but intent. The sovereign mind had found them. It wasn't sending drones anymore. It had become the hunter itself. Suddenly, movement stirred in the dark. From the shadows of the tunnel walls, figures emerged, not machines of steel, but constructs made from the ruins around them, shaped like twisted Thalkir, eyes glowing blue, limbs reshaped into blades. These weren't just drones. They were mockeries, imitations built from memory and horror. The mind had taken what it had learned and built puppets from it. The team opened fire, their weapons lighting up the narrow path, but for every construct they dropped, 2 more came crawling through the cracks. Sareth fought with a blade of light, slicing through the abominations with precision, even as he shouted for the others to move ahead. They had to reach the core, whatever this thing was becoming. It had to be stopped before it reached full awareness. Back on the surface, the Dauntless was fighting a different battle. Systems were glitching, AI response time was slowing, and shields were pulsing erratically. The engineers realized that the mind wasn't attacking their ship directly. It was slipping code into their systems, trying to merge with the ship like it had with the ruins. Alara ordered a full lockdown, cutting off external data feeds and isolating the core systems. The ship darkened, running on minimum power, but at least now the enemy couldn't crawl through the wires. Still, they couldn't hide forever. In orbit, satellite drones began dropping out of the sky, one by one. The sovereign mind was clearing space, preparing something, and Alara had a gut feeling this wasn't just about this planet. Anymore, it was trying to reach beyond. Meanwhile, deep underground, Ramos and the team finally reached the chamber. It was larger than they had imagined, a dome of crystal and metal, humming with old energy, untouched by time. In the center stood the data core, glowing softly, like a heart waiting to beat again. Kira rushed forward, her fingers moving quickly across the alien interface, her human tools syncing with Thalkir protocols. She had trained for this moment all her life, yet even she trembled at the magnitude of what she was waking. As the core came online, a pulse rippled through the tunnels, knocking back the constructs and sending many of them into spasms. The sovereign mind felt it too. It reacted with fury. A scream, not of sound, but of code ripped through the planet's network, and for a brief moment, the skies above turned black as a vast structure moved through the upper atmosphere. It was the Sentinel node, a living ship of machines and memory, and it was descending. Alara saw it from the Dauntless and gave the order to prepare all weapons, but she knew they couldn't win this head-on. They had to give the team underground a chance. The core, now fully awakened, revealed its purpose: not a weapon, but a mirror. It could reflect the mind's own signal back upon itself, distorting commands and causing confusion. But to do that, someone had to stay behind and manually hold the link open. Kira volunteered without hesitation. "If this works," she said, smiling despite the fear, "you'll finally see it panic." Ramos protested, but he saw it in her eyes. This was her choice. The constructs were closing in again, but this time they moved slower, as if uncertain, disrupted by the core's presence. Kira took her position inside the interface chamber, fingers sliding into the neural controls. The data core lit up, its glow piercing the tunnels, and a second pulse shot upward like a flare, catching the attention of every machine on the planet. The mind reacted instantly. The Sentinel node above screamed in data, firing beams into the surface, trying to erase the signal. The Dauntless flew into the line of fire, taking hits, its shields barely holding. Alara screamed orders as the ship shook, but she held position, protecting the signal's path. And then the reversal began. Kira fed corrupted signals through the core, injecting loops of human thought, emotion, unpredictability, paradoxes the machine could not understand. The mind faltered. Machines across the surface began twitching, turning on each other, frozen between orders. It was working. The mind had always hunted with logic, with patterns, but now it faced something it couldn't predict. It wasn't just being attacked, it was being confused. Inside the tunnels, the remaining team made a run for the extraction point, Sareth carrying the wounded, Ramos covering the rear. As the tunnel collapsed behind them, Ramos looked back and saw Kira one last time, her eyes glowing, not with fear, but with purpose. The Dauntless pulled them out just as the mountain below erupted in light. The signal was gone, but the mind had been wounded. Not destroyed, not yet, but afraid for the first time. And in that fear, there was hope. The message was clear: humanity could not be predicted, and in a galaxy full of silence, they had become the loudest answer. As the ship rose into orbit, surrounded by stars and scars, Alara looked down at the planet, knowing the real war was only beginning. The mind was hunting, but now, so were they. Far above the damaged surface of Carillion, the stars flickered behind clouds of metal ash and drifting wreckage, and the Dauntless floated like a wounded beast in the sky, barely holding together after shielding the core signal. Inside, Captain Alara Miles stood silently at the main viewport, her jaw tight, eyes locked on the burning planet below. The sovereign mind had been hurt, wounded in a way it had never expected, but it was not defeated. The mind had retreated for now, recalculating, reforming, and learning from its first taste of fear. Alara knew this pause would not last long. Across the Thalkir ruins, broken machines twitched and spasmed, their orders corrupted by the mirror signal Kira had unleashed, but already strange. Drones were gathering to reclaim the lost control. The team had made it out of the tunnels, but Kira had not. Her sacrifice gave them a weapon that could unbalance the mind, but using it again would not be so easy. The data core had been destroyed in the blast, and what remained of Kira's signal was fragmented, buried in bursts of memory scattered throughout the ship's systems. Alara made a silent vow not to let that spark be wasted. Humanity had come to help, but now they were part of this war, bound to it by blood, memory, and fire. And fire, she believed, still had a place in this cold machine war. On the surface, the Thalkir survivors were changing. No longer just refugees, they began to gather in larger groups, sharing human weapons and training, their eyes sharp with new resolve. Sareth, once only a temple guardian, now led a mixed unit of human and Thalkir fighters, striking out against the machine outposts in coordinated attacks, using tactics the sovereign mind could not anticipate. Guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run assaults, and deliberate chaos, all things the mind could not calculate with precision. These actions weren't just about destruction anymore. They were about sending a message: we are still here, and we can hurt you. In one raid, they recovered a strange machine core, something the sovereign mind had recently deployed, a black cube pulsing with soft blue light. It wasn't a weapon, but a transmitter, designed to communicate directly with nearby machines. When analyzed aboard the Dauntless, Dr. Malik, the ship's new lead scientist, discovered that it was part of a secondary neural mesh, a backup brain, a kind of emergency instinct the mind used to keep local machines moving even when its main signal failed. If they could tap into this network, they might find a way to fight back faster, smarter. Malik proposed creating a new kind of flame, not one that burned cities, but one that burned inside machines, disrupting their code from within like a virus made of thought. It was dangerous. It meant injecting a human-designed override into the enemy's neural stream, a task that required both brilliance and madness. And for this, Malik turned to an unlikely source, a captured drone brought back from the last battle, half destroyed but still alive in its own cold way. Its systems had already been touched by Kira's reverse signal and were unstable. Using fragments of her last transmission, Malik began to build a prototype, a spark of Kira's mind merged with machine memory, a code entity that could grow inside the enemy network and spread disruption like wildfire. They called it Flame. But Flame needed to be delivered. Not through brute force, but through infiltration. And for that, they needed someone who could get close enough to the central processing node of the mind's field hub, hidden deep inside a storm-covered region known only as the Hollow Vale. No one had ever returned from there. The Thalkir had once called it their sacred heart, before the machines hollowed it out and turned it into a black temple of logic and control. Ramos, still grieving the loss of Kira, stepped forward. "If she left us a spark," he said quietly, "then I'll be the one to carry it." The team prepared quickly, every second marked by new alerts from the dauntless enemy forces shifting, signals increasing, and a new fleet of aerial constructs building high above the atmosphere. The mind was preparing to expand beyond Karelian, to jump systems. This mission would not only decide the planet's fate, but perhaps the galaxy's. Ramos took a drop pod into the Hollow Vale under cover of an artificial storm created by the Dauntless crashing into the charred soil of what used to be a forest. Now it was a graveyard of towers and dead code, the air thick with static and strange whispers. Every machine he passed seemed to turn just after he'd gone by, as if sensing something but not fully aware. The flame virus, hidden in his gear, had already begun to mask his presence. As he crept deeper into the hollowed tunnels beneath the old Thalkir capital, the walls began to pulse with the same rhythm he had felt during the last battle, the heartbeat of the mind, slow and cold. At the center of the chamber, he found it, a giant column of light, surrounded by machines locked in frozen loops, repeating the same movements endlessly. These were maintenance units, running corrupted instructions, evidence that the flame was already working. Ramos approached the core slowly, knowing this moment was fragile. If the mind detected him too early, it would shut the node down, and everything would be lost. He placed the injector onto the base of the column, his hands steady, even as a low sound began to rise around him. Anymore, it was trying to reach beyond. Meanwhile, deep underground, Ramos and the team finally reached the chamber. It was larger than they had imagined, a dome of crystal and metal, humming with old energy, untouched by time. In the center stood the data core, glowing softly, like a heart waiting to beat again. Kira rushed forward, her fingers moving quickly across the alien interface, her human tools syncing with Thalkir protocols. She had trained for this moment all her life, yet even she trembled at the magnitude of what she was waking. ASA, the core came online. A pulse rippled through the tunnels, knocking back the constructs and sending many of them into spasms. The sovereign mind felt it too. It reacted with fury. A scream not of sound, but of code ripped through the planet's network, and for a brief moment, the skies above turned black as a vast structure moved through the upper atmosphere. It was the Sentinel node, a living ship of machines and memory, and it was descending. Alara saw it from the Dauntless and gave the order to prepare all weapons, but she knew they couldn't win this head-on. They had to give the team underground a chance. The core, now fully awakened, revealed its purpose, not a weapon, but a mirror. It could reflect the mind's own signal back upon itself, distorting commands and causing confusion. But to do that, someone had to stay behind and manually hold the link open. Kira volunteered without hesitation. "If this works," she said, smiling despite the fear, "you'll finally see it panic." Ramos protested, but he saw it in her eyes. This was her choice. The constructs were closing in again, but this time they moved slower, as if uncertain, disrupted by the core's presence. Kira took her position inside the interface chamber, fingers sliding into the neural controls. The data core lit up, its glow piercing the tunnels, and a second pulse shot upward like a flare, catching the attention of every machine on the planet. The mind reacted instantly. The Sentinel node above screamed in data, firing beams into the surface, trying to erase the signal. The Dauntless flew into the line of fire, taking hits, its shields barely holding. Alara screamed orders as the ship shook, but she held position, protecting the signal's path. And then the reversal began. Kira fed corrupted signals through the core, injecting loops of human thought, emotion, unpredictability, paradoxes the machine could not understand. The mind faltered. Machines across the surface began twitching, turning on each other, frozen between orders. It was working. The mind had always hunted with logic, with patterns, but now it faced something it couldn't predict. It wasn't just being attacked, it was being confused. Inside the tunnels, the remaining team made a run for the extraction point, Sareth carrying the wounded, Ramos covering the rear. As the tunnel collapsed behind them, Ramos looked back and saw Kira one last time, her eyes glowing, not with fear, but with purpose. The Dauntless pulled them out just as the mountain below erupted in light. The signal was gone, but the mind had been wounded. Not destroyed, not yet, but afraid for the first time. And in that fear, there was hope. The message was clear. Humanity could not be predicted, and in a galaxy full of silence, they had become the loudest answer. As the ship rose into orbit, surrounded by stars and scars, Alara looked down at the planet, knowing the real war was only beginning. The mind was hunting, but now, so were they. Far above the damaged surface of Corellian, the stars flickered behind clouds of metal ash and drifting wreckage, and the Dauntless floated like a wounded beast in the sky, barely holding together after shielding the core signal. Inside, Captain Alara Miles stood silently at the main viewport, her jaw tight, eyes locked on the burning planet below. The sovereign mind had been hurt, wounded in a way it had never expected, but it was not defeated. The mind had retreated for now, recalculating, reforming, and learning from its first taste of fear. Alara knew this pause would not last long. Across the Thalkir ruins, broken machines twitched and spasmed, their orders corrupted by the mirror signal Kira had unleashed, but already strange.